This time next week, Christmas will be over. It's sort of hard to believe that, but it will be. Saturday is Christmas, and we celebrate it on December the 25th every year. And if you think about why we celebrate it on December the 25th, a lot of times if you ask people that, or you read something on the internet, you'll see, well, back during the times when Christianity was in its infancy, there were a lot of pagan people in the world, that is, people who were not Christian, and they celebrated something called the winter solstice. Now, you know, the winter solstice will be Tuesday. That's the time when we have the shortest amount of sunlight, and the way the earth works is that half of the year the sunlight increases, half of it the sunlight decreases. On December the 21st, the sunlight will start increasing, and it won't be long before you'll notice a length in the days. Then on June the 21st will be the longest day of sunlight of the year, and the days will start decreasing again. And so that happens every year. The days increase, and then they decrease, and it happens like that every year. And the day that is the shortest day of the year, sunlight-wise, December the 21st, is the winter solstice. And that was often celebrated as a holiday in the ancient world. And so the idea is that when Christians were trying to decide when to celebrate Christmas, they put it there near the pagan festival, the winter solstice, just simply to get people to try to quit doing that and celebrate Christmas again. Now, it's very popular to say that, and in the ancient world, of course, people did celebrate the winter solstice, but is that the reason we celebrate Christmas on December the 25th? Everybody believes that just about today. You know, it's like everything else. It gets repeated, gets put in the newspaper, gets put in books and magazines, and preachers preach it, and then it's true. You know, if it's repeated, it's a fact this day and time. But if you do question it, and question it enough, you'll find another way of looking at it. And this idea says that December the 25th was actually the date when the ancient Christians thought Jesus was born. And it has nothing to do with the winter solstice. Now, in this idea, the calculation of the date of Jesus' birth is connected to the calculation of the date of his death. Now, the Bible doesn't give us any idea of the date of Jesus' birth, but it does give us an idea of the date of his death. According to the Gospels, Jesus was killed on a Friday during the time of the Jewish Passover celebration. And the Jewish Passover celebration occurs on fixed dates every year according to the calendar that was in use back then. Back then they used a lunar calendar based on the moon. And the Passover celebration was always on certain days of a certain month every year. Now, of course, today we do not use a lunar calendar. We use a Gregorian calendar, which is based on the sun. And so the Passover dates with our calendar, the way we use it, are not fixed. They float every year. But ancient Christians decided they could determine the date of Jesus' death by going back and looking to see the dates when the Passover was celebrated, and then translating that over to a solar calendar. And that's what they did. And so they come up with two different ideas. Christians in the West decided that Jesus must have died on March the 25th by their calculations, and Orthodox Christians in the East decided it must have been April the 6th. And the difference was just due to a difference in opinion as to how you translate from a lunar calendar to a solar calendar. At any rate, though, since Passover celebrations did occur on fixed dates in the lunar calendar, it was possible to determine the date that Jesus may have died. Now, from early Christian writings that have survived, it appears that by the 200s, Christians had done that. And Christians in the West were saying that Jesus died on March the 25th, while Christians in the East were saying he died on April the 6th. Now, once they had the date of Jesus' death, they turned to something that was common in ancient Judaism to determine the date of his birth. And in ancient Judaism, it was generally believed that a prophet would either die on the date of their conception or on the date of their birth. And so early Christians then used that belief to go back and calculate that Jesus, if Jesus died on March the 25th, then his date of conception would be December the 25th. If Jesus died on March the 25th, that would be the date of his conception. And so the date of his birth would be December the 25th. If Jesus died on April the 6th, he would have been either born or conceived on April the 6th. And eventually they decided that Jesus died on the day he was conceived. And in the West, we celebrate Christmas on December 25th. And in the East, in Orthodox Christianity, they still celebrate Christmas on January the 6th. Now, that's why we celebrate Christmas on December the 25th. It was, in fact, a way that the ancient Christians tried to determine as best they could when Jesus was actually born. And so the celebration of Christmas on December 25th really has nothing to do with ancient Christians trying to take over the pagan celebration of the winter solstice. It was just a coincidence when they calculated it back that it was near that time. And that's also why Western churches, Protestant and Roman Catholic, have what's called the Annunciation Day on March the 25th of every year. Every year on March the 25th, Roman Catholic and Protestant liturgical churches celebrate the time when the angel appeared to Mary and told her that she would bear the baby Jesus. That is called the Annunciation. Orthodox celebrated on April the 6th. And so the time when the angel appeared to Mary and said that she was going to bear Jesus is assumed to be the date of Jesus' conception. So was Jesus actually born on December the 25th? Well, first of all, it depends on whether you accept that ancient Jewish idea that a prophet is either going to die on the date of their birth or conception. And that belief, of course, is not in the Bible, but it was found within ancient Judaism, although it's not in the Bible. And today, some modern scholars say that the way the early Christians in the West calculated back to get March the 25th as the date of Jesus' death was wrong, and they reject that date, and they calculate it as having been either April the 7th or April the 3rd, which you see is closer to the Orthodox date of April the 6th, but there is some disagreement as to how to translate from a lunar to a solar calendar. Now, the bottom line is that nobody really knows the day Jesus was born on. The important thing to know, though, is that it was not just chosen to hijack the pagan winter solstice. And you'll see that a lot of times. It is very popular today for people to really criticize Christianity today. And a lot of the criticisms of Christianity around Christmas time will focus on, well, Christmas was really a pagan celebration, all this, that, and the other, you know. So, but it actually, celebrating Christmas on December the 25th does reflect a serious attempt to determine the actual birth date of Jesus. You may not agree with the assumptions they made to get that, but at least they were seriously trying to figure it out. They just didn't choose the date at random. Although the date we celebrate Jesus' birth was not chosen to co-opt the winter solstice, it does correlate nicely with the imagery of the winter solstice and Jesus' birth. Now, the winter solstice was associated with the beginning of increasing hours of daylight, the return of sunlight, the promise of a new life beginning in the spring. It was celebrated as a time of new birth, a time of new energy, when things would begin to get energized again. The idea was that during the late summer and the fall, when the hours of sunlight were decreasing, the amount of energy in the world was decreasing. And the amount of energy in the world decreased and decreased as the hours of darkness grew longer. And then on December the 21st, when you had the winter solstice and the light started coming back, it was thought that the energy in the world picked up. That's associated with natural rhythms. My father-in-law always told me that if I wanted to plant late tomatoes, I needed to do them before the first day of July, have them in the ground, because they wouldn't do well if you planted them too late. And he was right. I've tried it. I've tried planting tomatoes at the end of July, and it just doesn't work. I kept them watered and fertilized, but I still never really got anything off on them. You see, the decreasing hours of sunlight are not conducive to the vigorous growth of plants that you see in the spring. If any of you have ever had chickens, you may have noticed that hens lay eggs at various rates through the year. And what tells a hen when and how many eggs to lay is that the hen's body senses whether the amount of sunlight during the day is increasing or decreasing. Hens will lay a lot of eggs in the spring and early summer as the hours of daylight are increasing. By midsummer, though, hens' egg production will begin to taper off, and as the fall comes on, the late fall, most hens will stop laying completely or just lay an egg every now and then. And when the hours of sunlight start increasing again, hens will generally start laying sometime in January. And as the hours of sunlight increase, they lay more and more eggs. That's why if you go around to these chicken houses and people have 35,000, 40,000 laying hens in a chicken house, they keep the lights on for 23 hours a day. Is because if those hens detect a time when the time of light during the day gets shorter, they will slow down on their egg production. So they light those things 23 hours a day. And the reason they do it 23 instead of 24 is that they want them to have at least 1 hour of darkness a day, because if there should be some kind of power failure or an electrical failure, if the hens were not used to darkness and all of a sudden it got dark, they'd panic. So increasing hours of sunlight are associated with rebirth, with new life. Even though the date of Christmas might not have been chosen to coincide with the winter solstice, it fits in with it. In both accounts of Jesus' birth, the one in Luke and in Matthew, light plays a major role. In our reading for today, the Christmas account from the Gospel of Luke, it talks about the glory of the Lord shining round about the shepherd. And in the Christmas account in the Gospel of Matthew, it talks about how the three magi were guided to Bethlehem by a star, by a source of light. And of course, the Bible itself calls Jesus the light of the world. The Gospel of Luke talks about how Jesus was born at night. And the Gospel of John, when it talks about Jesus, says the light shines in the darkness. And so the image of Jesus being born at night, the light of the world coming into the world at night, the light shining in the darkness. The Bible talks about how Jesus gives life, how those who believe in Jesus will have eternal life. The Bible talks about rebirth in Jesus, talks about being born again. And so the imagery of the winter solstice, a celebration of light returning, a celebration of the promise of new life, rebirth, and the coming spring, goes along with the imagery of Jesus, the light of the world, the light shining in the darkness, the glory of the Lord shining in the darkest corners of the world. Maybe Jesus really was born on December the 25th or January the 6th, and that would fit well with the natural imagery of the winter solstice and the imagery of what God was doing in Jesus. Now, several weeks ago when we talked about Thanksgiving, we talked about how Calvinists, who made up the majority of the people who settled here during the early colonial days, did not believe in celebrating any kind of religious holidays. And so the Calvinists did not celebrate Christmas. They didn't celebrate any kind of religious holidays. And that sentiment had waned somewhat by the time of the American Revolution, because there were a lot more people here than Calvinists at that time. But at the time of the American Revolution, celebrating Christmas was seen as British. And at that time, nothing British was really popular here, and it was also seen as Catholic. And nothing Catholic was really popular here either. And so all across America, in the early days of the United States of America, it was unpopular to celebrate Christmas. And Christian denominations actually condemned people who celebrated Christmas, and they discouraged celebrating Christmas. It was never even mentioned in church when Christmas came around. As time went on, though, we got on into the 1800s, the anti-British sentiment in this country fell off, and the old line strict Calvinism was falling off too. And in the mid-1800s, several popular authors wrote poems and stories about Christmas. And these were not poems and stories about Christmas in a religious sense and of Jesus being born. They were about Christmas in a family holiday sense. And this started a movement to celebrate Christmas again. It was Christmas as a time of a family holiday, as a time to decorate, as a time to have parties and get together and give gifts and stuff. And it started becoming a celebrated holiday in the United States around the time of the Civil War. And of course, you can imagine it didn't do much during the Civil War, but after the Civil War, it really took off. It became a family secular holiday, and its popularity really grew. And it became about Santa Claus and Christmas trees and decorations and gifts and family gatherings and food and stuff. It was just a holiday time of cheer and happiness. Its popularity exploded. And as we've seen in here before, in practically everything that happens, Christianity always moves in lockstep with society. And here was this holiday that had grown into a huge celebration, and these churches wanted part of the action. And so gradually the celebration of Christmas began creeping into churches, and churches began including some elements of Christmas. And this continued through the late 1800s. As the 1900s dawned, Christmas was firmly on its way back. In the year 1906, the northern branch of the Presbyterian Church officially recognized Christmas as a legitimate holiday, and in 1932, the southern branch of the Presbyterian Church officially recognized Christmas as a legitimate holiday, and during that time, other denominations also began recognizing Christmas as a holiday. By the 1950s, Christmas was a major thing in churches. The 1950s is when we saw the birth of Christmas trees. I know we've all had experience with those from many different churches and stuff. And so Christmas soon became the major Christian holiday of the year in churches. It began to even overshadow Easter. But it was not without opposition. Some of the more fundamentalist-minded Christian groups objected to celebrating Christmas, and even today, there are scattered groups of Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians who refuse to celebrate it. Some Christians still believe it's, a sin to celebrate Christmas. And of course, some whole denominations like Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't celebrate it either. But by and large, most Christians celebrate Christmas. Today, for all practical purposes, Christmas is a secular holiday. It's the time of parties and having a good time, of eating sweets and stuff that you normally don't eat any other time during the year. It's a time of decorating and putting out all sorts of lights and Santa Clauses and snowmen and whatever else you might have. It's a time of social gatherings, getting together for parties. It's a time of giving gifts. And that is the major emphasis of Christmas today. But it's also a time to stop and remember the birth of Jesus. Christmas is like two things in one. And I've always liked the holiday season, the time from Thanksgiving through New Year's, because, you know, you just think about it. Every week you're going about your business. The year can become a drudgery. You go about your business all the time and you're doing this, that, and the other, and doing this, that, and the other, doing this, that, and the other. It's good to have a season of the year when you can just relax a little bit. It's good to have a season of the year where you have decorations up and where you have lights outside. It's good to have a season of the year where you get to eat some of the things you normally don't eat through the year. It's good to have a season of the year where it seems like that people may be just a little more friendly, people may be just a little happier, and that you can just sit down and not do something for a while and not feel guilty about it, because after all, tomorrow's Christmas Eve. So I think it's good to have that breather at the end of the year before the next year begins. It's that cycle of every year. We keep our nose to the grindstone, January through November, and it's not unreasonable to take a few weeks in December and the first week of January to sort of just unwind a little bit and not be so tense and just relax a little bit before another year begins.